The crack of gunfire echoed across Preston Valley Shooting Club as Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance, her modest appearance drawing dismissive glances from the exclusively male membership gathered for the annual championship qualifier. At 42, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a faded flannel shirt over worn jeans, she looked more like a small-town librarian than someone who belonged at the state's most prestigious shooting facility. The mahogany-paneled reception area reeked of cigar smoke and old money, its walls adorned with photographs of champions dating back decades. Not a single female face among them. "Ma'am, I think you're lost," the young receptionist said without looking up from his computer, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd redirected wayward tourists. "The visitors' center is across the street. This is a private club for serious marksmen." Sarah placed her weathered hands on the polished counter, the slight tremor in her fingers not from nerves but from memories she'd spent 15 years trying to suppress. "I'm here for the qualifier registration. Sarah Mitchell. I submitted my application 3 weeks ago." The receptionist's fingers paused over his keyboard, and he finally looked up, his expression shifting from dismissive to confused. There must be some mistake. This is the state championship qualifier. We don't have a ladies' division." Before Sarah could respond, a commanding voice cut through the lobby's muted conversations. "Is there a problem here, Davidson?" Victor Brennan strode across the marble floor with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything in his life. At 55, the club president and 3-time state champion carried himself like royalty, his custom Italian suit and hand-tooled leather holster speaking of wealth that went back generations. His steel-gray eyes assessed Sarah with the casual disdain of someone evaluating livestock at auction. "This woman seems to think she's registered for our qualifier," Davidson explained, emphasizing woman, as if it were a foreign concept. Brennan's laugh was sharp and condescending. "Let me guess. Some feminist agenda? Trying to make a statement?" He leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming. "Listen, sweetheart, this isn't a weekend plinking course. Men train for years to compete at this level. We use real firearms here, not pink pistols from the sporting goods store." The group of men gathering behind Brennan chuckled appreciatively, their designer shooting vests and $1,000 sidearms marking them as his inner circle. Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I'm fully aware of the competition requirements. Mr. Brennan, my application was approved by the state board. I have every right to compete." She pulled out a folded letter from her jacket pocket, the official seal visible even from a distance. Brennan snatched the paper, scanning it with growing irritation. His face flushed as he realized it was legitimate. Signed by the state athletics commissioner himself. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, then raised his voice for the benefit of his audience. "Fine. You want to embarrass yourself in front of the entire shooting community? Be my guest. But don't come crying when you can't even complete the first stage." He turned to Davidson. "Put her in the roster. Last position. We'll make this quick." As he walked away, Sarah heard him tell his companions, "This should be entertaining. Haven't had a good laugh in weeks." What none of them knew was that 15 years ago, Sarah Mitchell had been Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Williams, commander of the most decorated Special Operations Sniper Unit in Afghanistan. Her file, still classified at the highest levels, documented over 200 confirmed kills and a mission success rate that had never been equaled. She'd been known as Angel Eye for her ability to place shots with surgical precision from distances that defied belief. But that was before the betrayal, before the mission that went wrong, before she'd buried her identity, along with her faith in the system she'd served. The memories flooded back as she signed the registration forms, her hands steady despite the storm inside. Firebase Cobra, Helmand Province. Her last mission. Intelligence had identified a meeting of high-value targets in a compound 3 kilometers from their position. It should have been routine. Another successful operation for her unit. But someone had leaked their position, whether it was incompetence or malice. She never found out. The ambush had killed 6 of her team, including her spotter and closest friend, Marcus Rodriguez. She'd held him as he died, promising to take care of his family, promising to find out who was responsible. The investigation that followed revealed a web of corruption reaching into the highest levels of military contracting. Brennan Industries, Victor Brennan's defense company, had been selling intelligence to the highest bidder. American positions traded for lucrative contracts in the rebuilding effort. But when Sarah had pushed for prosecution, she'd been stonewalled. Brennan's connections ran too deep. His pockets too full of congressional funding. She'd been given a choice: accept an honorable discharge and disappear, or face trumped-up charges that would destroy her reputation and leave her team's families without benefits. She'd chosen exile, creating a new identity and vanishing into small-town America. For 15 years, she'd lived quietly, working at a hardware store, avoiding anything that might reconnect her to her past, until 6 months ago, when she'd learned that Marcus's daughter, Maria, was struggling to pay for college, that his widow was working 3 jobs to keep their home. The guilt had been eating at her, the promise she'd made dying in her arms. Then she'd seen the announcement for the Preston Valley Championship, with its $100,000 prize. More importantly, she'd seen Victor Brennan's name as the defending champion and club president. The morning of the qualifier dawned gray and humid, perfect conditions for testing a shooter's ability to compensate for environmental factors. Sarah arrived early, carrying a simple case containing a basic Remington 700, the kind of rifle any hunter might own. Around here, competitors unloaded custom rifles worth more than most people's cars, their equipment cases looking like mobile armories. She recognized several faces from her research: professional shooters and law enforcement trainers who made their living on the competition circuit. And there, holding court near the range entrance, was Victor Brennan. He'd changed into his shooting attire, a custom-tailored vest with his company logo embroidered on the back. Brennan Industries, defending America's future. The irony made Sarah's stomach turn. He was demonstrating his technique to a group of younger shooters, his movements precise but showy, designed more for intimidation than efficiency. When he spotted Sarah, his face split into a predatory grin. "Gentlemen, it seems our diversity candidate has arrived. Perhaps we should take bets on which stage she'll quit at." The format was brutal even for experienced shooters. 10 different shooting challenges to be completed in sequence, each designed to test a different skill set: static precision at increasing distances, rapid target acquisition, shooting from unstable platforms, engaging multiple targets while moving, low light conditions, and finally, the signature challenge that gave the competition its reputation: 10 shots at 10 different targets at varying distances, all to be completed in 10 seconds. Most competitors considered completing all stages an achievement. Winning required exceptional scores across every challenge. The first stage seemed deceptively simple: 5 shots at 100 yards. Prone position. Unlimited time. As Sarah took her position, she heard the whispers and chuckles from the observation area. Brennan had positioned himself prominently, surrounded by his entourage and several media photographers he'd undoubtedly invited to document his expected victory. Sarah settled behind her rifle, feeling the familiar weight, the cool metal against her cheek. For a moment, she was back in Afghanistan, the Hindu Kush mountains stretching endlessly before her. Marcus's voice calm in her earpiece calling wind adjustments. She fired her first shot, deliberately pulling it slightly left, hitting the 7 ring instead of the bullseye. The laughter from the gallery was immediate and cruel. "Told you," someone muttered. "Probably never shot anything beyond 50 feet. Her second shot was better, just outside the center, drawing patronizing applause. By the fifth shot, she'd shown enough improvement to advance to the next stage, but her score put her dead last among the 40 competitors. Brennan made sure to walk past her station as she packed up, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Not bad for a first-timer, though at this rate, you'll need a calculator to figure out your final score. His cronies laughed dutifully, but Sarah noticed something in his eyes, the slightest flicker of unease. He'd been watching her technique, the way she'd controlled her breathing, the economy of her movements. Despite the poor scores, there was something about her form that didn't match an amateur. The second stage ramped up the difficulty, rapid fire at multiple targets. Simulating defensive shooting scenarios, competitors had 30 seconds to engage 5 targets at varying distances, with penalties for misses. Sarah watched the others shoot first, noting their techniques, their rhythms. When her turn came, she allowed herself to perform slightly better, her shots grouping respectably, though still below average. But those watching closely might have noticed something odd. While her scores were mediocre, her target prioritization was flawless, engaging threats in the exact order a combat veteran would, not the sequence a sport shooter would choose. By the fourth stage, the field had thinned to 25 competitors. The challenges were becoming progressively more difficult, and several shooters had withdrawn rather than face the embarrassment of failing completely. Sarah maintained her position near the bottom of the rankings, but she hadn't missed a single qualifying score. She was like a student deliberately scoring C's on every test, unremarkable but oddly consistent. Brennan's amusement had shifted to irritation. During the lunch break, she overheard him berating the match director. "This is what happens when we let politics interfere with tradition. She's making a mockery of the competition." The afternoon brought the advanced stages, where raw marksmanship gave way to practical skills. Stage 6 required shooting from a moving platform, simulating shots from a vehicle. Stage 7 introduced wind fans and obscured targets. Stage 8 tested low-light shooting skills. With each stage, Sarah allowed her true abilities to peek through just a little more. Like an artist adding layers to a painting, she was still in last place. But the margin was narrowing. And more importantly, the quality of her technique was becoming impossible to ignore. It was during Stage 9 that the first crack appeared in her facade. The challenge involved engaging targets while moving through an obstacle course, with penalties for hitting no-shoot targets representing civilians. It was a scenario she'd lived through countless times in urban combat, and muscle memory took over. She completed the course in a time that would have placed her in the top 5, her target discrimination perfect. Not a single civilian hit, but it was her movement that drew gasps from knowledgeable observers, the fluid transitions, the way she cut angles, the textbook military footwork that no amount of civilian training could replicate. She realized her mistake immediately and deliberately fumbled the reload on her last magazine, adding precious seconds to her time and dropping her back to a mediocre finish. But the damage was done. Several competitors were now watching her with suspicious eyes, and even Brennan's smugness had been replaced with something harder to read. As she left the course, she passed Jake Martinez, a former Army Ranger turned competitive shooter. He gave her a long look, then nodded slightly, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between those who'd served in combat. He knew, even if he couldn't place her. The final stage was the legendary Decathlon of Death, 10 targets at distances ranging from 50 to 500 yards, each requiring a single precise shot, all to be completed within 10 seconds. It was considered impossible by most shooters. Even completing all 10 shots in the time limit was an achievement, regardless of accuracy. The club record stood at 7 hits, set by Brennan himself 3 years ago. Most competitors managed 3 or 4 before the buzzer sounded. Only the top 10 competitors would attempt this final stage. Sarah had calculated carefully throughout the day. ensuring she would qualify in exactly 10th place, low enough to maintain her cover, but high enough to earn her shot at the grand finale. As the final qualifier was announced and her name appeared on the board, Brennan's face darkened. He strode over to where she was cleaning her rifle. His earlier pretense of civility abandoned. "I don't know what your game is, lady, but this ends now. You think you can waltz in here and disrespect everything we've built?" Sarah looked up at him calmly, seeing past the expensive clothes and bluster to the man who'd traded American lives for profit. "I'm just here to compete. Mr. Brennan, isn't that what this is about? The best shooter wins?" Her mild tone seemed to enrage him further. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I've destroyed careers, ended lives. You're nothing but a nobody playing dress-up in a world you don't understand." The irony was almost too much. If only he knew how many lives she'd ended, how many careers she'd destroyed, all in service to her country, all with honor and purpose. Everything he pretended to represent with his defense contracts and patriotic posturing. She turned back to her rifle, dismissing him without a word. The gesture pushed him past his breaking point. His hand shot out, grabbing her shoulder roughly. "I'm talking to you, bitch." The movement was so fast that observers would argue about what they'd seen. One moment, Brennan was grabbing her. The next, he was on his knees, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle, Sarah's thumb applying precise pressure to a nerve cluster that sent white-hot pain shooting through his body. To anyone watching, it looked like he'd simply collapsed. She released him immediately, stepping back with apparent concern. "Mr. Brennan, are you all right? You seem to have fallen." He struggled to his feet, face flushed with pain and humiliation, cradling his arm. Several people had rushed over, including the match director and a photographer who'd captured the entire incident. Brennan looked around wildly, seeing the confusion on faces. Realizing how it must have appeared, the club president inexplicably dropping to his knees in front of the woman he'd been harassing all day. She attacked me," he sputtered. But the claim sounded absurd even to his supporters. The match director, an elderly man named Carl Worthington, who'd run competitions for 30 years, stepped between them. "Victor, I think you need to calm down. The final stage starts in an hour. Perhaps you should prepare." It was a gentle rebuke, but a rebuke nonetheless. Worthington had served in Korea and recognized the controlled violence in Sarah's response. The precise application of force that spoke of extensive training. He gave her a measuring look, then nodded toward the preparation area. "Ma'am, you might want to get ready as well." As the crowd dispersed, Jake Martinez approached her. "That was a textbook nerve strike," he said quietly. "Haven't seen one that clean since Ranger School? Who were you with?" Sarah met his eyes, seeing a kindred spirit. Someone who might understand, but the risk was too great. "I took some self-defense classes," she said mildly. "You never know when you might need them." Jake studied her for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "Yeah, I took some classes too. Got the scars to prove it." He walked away, but not before adding, "Good luck in the final. Something tells me it's going to be interesting." The gallery had swelled to over 200 spectators for the final stage. Word had spread through the shooting community about the mysterious woman who'd somehow qualified for the Decathlon, and many had come expecting to see either a spectacular failure or something unprecedented. The other 9 finalists were warming up, each preparing for their shot at glory. Brennan stood apart, his usual entourage subdued after the earlier incident. He'd changed shirts, but Sarah could see him favoring his right arm slightly. The nerve strike would leave him sore for days. Carl Worthington took the microphone, his voice carrying across the range. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final stage of the Preston Valley Championship qualifier. The Decathlon of Death has stood as our ultimate challenge for 15 years. 10 targets, 10 seconds. Distances from 50 to 500 yards. Competitors will shoot in reverse order of qualification, meaning our 10th place Califier shoots first. He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. That would be Miss Sarah Mitchell. As Sarah stepped up to the firing line, she could feel the weight of every eye upon her. The 10 targets were arranged in a complex pattern, each one requiring not just precision, but instant calculation of distance, wind, and elevation. The closest was a standard bullseye at 50 yards, child's play. The farthest was a 6-inch steel plate at 500 yards, barely visible to the naked eye. Between them lay 8 other targets of varying sizes and distances, positioned to require maximum adjustment between shots, 10 seconds to find, aim, and fire at each one. Most shooters developed a pattern, starting near and working far, or vice versa. The truly ambitious tried to optimize their sequence for minimal adjustment time. Sarah had already calculated her approach, not the optimal pattern for score, but something far more devastating to Brennan's world. She would shoot them in order of difficulty, easiest to hardest, a sequence that would build drama with each successive shot. She loaded 10 rounds into her rifle. Standard match ammunition. Nothing special. Around her, the crowd grew quiet, even the skeptics falling silent. There was something about the way she stood, the absolute stillness of her presence, that commanded attention. "Shooter ready?" Worthington called. Sarah nodded once. "Range is hot." On the buzzer, the electronic timer displayed 10:00 in glowing red numbers. Everyone knew that even the fastest shooters rarely had time for aimed shots at all 10 targets. The record of 7 hits had included 3 misses, simply from running out of time. The buzzer sounded. What happened next would be debated in shooting circles for years to come. Sarah moved like a machine, but a machine programmed with lethal grace. Her first shot took the 50-yard target dead center before the echo of the buzzer had faded. 7 seconds. The rifle swung smoothly to the 75-yard target, bark of the shot and clang of impact nearly simultaneous. 4 seconds. 100 yards. Dua. 1 seconds. 150. 9 seconds. By the time she'd cleared the first 5 targets, all perfect hits, the crowd was beginning to stir. This wasn't the performance of an amateur or even a talented hobbyist. This was something else entirely. Her movements had an economy that spoke of countless repetitions, muscle memory drilled in until conscious thought was unnecessary. The rifle was an extension of her body, the targets merely points in space waiting to be connected. 200 yards. Tiga. 8 seconds. 250. 4. 7 seconds. 300. 5. 6 seconds. 8 hits. 8 perfect shots, already surpassing the course record with over 4 seconds remaining. But the last 2 targets were where legends were separated from the merely excellent. The 400-yard target was a 8-inch square, challenging, even with unlimited time. Sarah's rifle spoke again. 8 seconds. 9 for 9. The crowd was on its feet now. Even Brennan's supporters caught up in witnessing history. The final target seemed impossibly small at 500 yards. A 6-inch circle that would tax the best shooters on their finest day. Sarah had 3 seconds left. An eternity in a sport measured in fractions. She could have rushed, could have thrown a prayer downrange, and hoped. Instead, she took a full second to breathe, another to fine-tune her aim, and with 1 second remaining, squeezed the trigger with the same calm precision she'd shown on 100 battlefields. The sound of steel ringing downrange was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. 10 shots. 10 hits. Joe. 7 seconds. It wasn't just a course record, it was a performance that rewrote the definition of what was possible. Sarah saved her weapon and stepped back from the line, her expression as calm as if she'd just finished a routine practice session. Around here, chaos erupted. Photographers pushed forward. Spectators applauded thunderously. And fellow competitors stared in shock and awe. Jake Martinez was the first to reach her. His face split in a huge grin. "I knew it. I don't know who you are, lady, but that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on a range." Other shooters crowded around, offering congratulations, asking questions about her technique, her training. Where had she learned to shoot like that? Who had taught her? Was she military, special forces, Olympic team? Sarah deflected the questions with vague responses, but her eyes never left Victor Brennan. He stood frozen at the preparation area, his face cycling through emotions: shock, rage, fear, and finally something that might have been recognition. Their eyes met across the crowd, and in that moment, she saw him understand. Maybe not the specifics, but he knew this wasn't random. This was personal. Carl Worthington pushed through the crowd, his weathered face showing rare emotion. "Miss Mitchell, in 40 years of running competitions, I've never seen anything like that. That wasn't just shooting, that was artistry." He paused, studying her with eyes that had seen too much. "I suppose you wouldn't want to tell an old soldier where you served." Before she could respond, Brennan's voice cut through the celebration. "This is impossible. She's a fraud. A ringer. No one shoots like that without years of professional training. I demand an investigation." The crowd turned to him, and the contrast was stark. The bitter accusations of a dethroned champion against the quiet dignity of the woman who just made history. Worthington's expression hardened. "Victor, you've competed here for 15 years. You know the rules. Any registered competitor can participate. And Miss Mitchell followed every regulation to the letter." "She's been sandbagging all day," Brennan continued, desperation creeping into his voice. "Deliberately underperforming to make fools of us all. It's deception. It's—" He stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing that accusing someone of being too good was hardly grounds for disqualification. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Mr. Brennan is right. I haven't been entirely honest." The admission sent a ripple through the crowd. "I did serve in the military, and I did receive extensive marksmanship training." She paused, meeting Brennan's eyes directly. 15 years ago, I was part of a unit that was betrayed by someone who sold intelligence to the enemy. Good soldiers died because someone valued money over American lives." The implication hung in the air, and those who knew Brennan's business dealings began to shift uncomfortably. His defense contracts, his connections to military intelligence, the rumors that had followed him for years but never quite stuck. "After I left the service," Sarah continued, "I promised myself I'd never pick up a rifle again. But sometimes promises have to be broken, especially when there are debts to be paid." She turned to Worthington. "I'd like to donate my prize money to the Veterans Support Foundation, specifically earmarked for Gold Star families." The gesture transformed the moment from personal triumph to something larger. Applause broke out again, but this time with a different quality, respect not just for her skill, but for her character. Brennan tried one last attack. "This is all very touching, but I still maintain." His words were cut off by the arrival of two men in dark suits. Their credentials, identifying them as federal agents, they moved through the crowd with purpose, their destination clear. "Victor Brennan," the lead agent said. "I'm Agent David Chen with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. We need to ask you some questions regarding irregularities in your defense contracts, specifically related to intelligence sharing in Afghanistan between 2008 and 2010. The color drained from Brennan's face. Around him, his supporters melted away, suddenly finding urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "This is harassment," he blustered, connected to her false accusations. Agent Chen's expression didn't change. "Sir, this investigation has been ongoing for 18 months. Your appearance here today is merely coincidental. Though I must admit, he glanced at Sarah with what might have been approval. The timing is fortuitous. We've had difficulty locating certain witnesses who served in Afghanistan during that period. Perhaps Ms. Mitchell could assist us with our inquiries. As the agents led Brennan away, Sarah felt a weight she'd carried for 15 years begin to lift. She hadn't planned for this, hadn't known about the investigation, but perhaps justice had its own timeline. Around here, the crowd was dispersing, the day's drama already becoming legend. Tomorrow, the shooting world would be buzzing with talk of the unknown woman who'd destroyed the Decathlon record. But for now, there were more immediate concerns. Jake Martinez appeared at her elbow, joined by several other veterans she'd noticed in the crowd. "So, Angel Eye," he said quietly, using the call sign she hadn't heard in 15 years. "Yeah, we figured it out. Your unit's exploits weren't as classified as you might think. At least not among those of us who were there." He gestured to the others. "Tommy here was at Firebase Phoenix when you took out that sniper team. Maria was part of the convoy you covered during the ambush at Rude Irish. We remember, Sarah found herself surrounded by a different kind of community. Men and women who understood what she'd been through, who'd walked similar paths. They didn't ask for details or explanations, didn't need her to justify her choices. They simply accepted her, the way soldiers always accepted their own. As the sun set over Preston Valley, painting the range in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Mitchell finally allowed herself to smile. She'd kept her promise to Marcus after all, just not in the way she'd expected. His daughter would get her college fund. His widow would receive support. And the man whose greed had cost so many lives would finally face justice. Carl Worthington approached as she was packing up her rifle. "Miss Mitchell, or should I say Colonel Williams, I hope you'll consider returning for the state championship, though I suspect you might have to compete in the professional division now." He winked. "Can't have you sandbagging against the amateurs anymore." Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "We'll see. Mr. Worthington, I've spent 15 years hiding from who I was. Maybe it's time to see who I can become." As she walked toward the parking lot, rifle case in hand, she passed the spot where Brennan had grabbed her earlier. The photographer who'd captured the incident jogged up, camera in hand. "Ma'am, I got some great shots of your performance. Mind if I send them to Shooting Sports Monthly? This is going to be their cover story for sure." Sarah considered, then nodded. "Just make sure they spell my name right. It's Mitchell, with 2 L's. The photographer grinned and hurried off, already composing headlines in his mind. Sarah continued to her truck, a battered Ford that had seen better days but still ran true. As she loaded her gear, she felt eyes on her and turned to find a young woman, maybe 25, wearing an ill-fitting range rental vest and holding a borrowed rifle. "Excuse me," the woman said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, I've been trying to learn to shoot for months, but the guys here always make me feel like I don't belong. Watching you today, it made me realize that belonging isn't something they get to decide. It's something we claim for ourselves." Sarah studied the young woman, seeing echoes of her own journey in those determined eyes. "What's your name?" "Jessica?" "Jessica Chen. Agent Chen is my uncle. Actually, he's been telling me I should learn to protect myself. But," she gestured helplessly at the intimidating environment of the range. Sarah made a decision that would have surprised her morning self. "Jessica, I'm going to be in town for a while dealing with some legal matters. How would you like some lessons? Fair warning, I'm a tough instructor." Jessica's face lit up. "Really? You do that?" Sarah nodded, thinking of Marcus, of all the soldiers who'd never made it home, of all the chances for redemption that life rarely offered. Consider it paying forward a debt. But there's one condition. Anything. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong anywhere you have a right to be. Not here. Not anywhere. Deal? Jessica straightened. squaring her shoulders in unconscious imitation of Sarah's military bearing. Deal. As Sarah drove away from Preston Valley, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the broken soldier who'd fled into anonymity 15 years ago, nor was she the hardware store clerk who'd been sleepwalking through life. She was something new. Forged in the crucible of justice served and truth revealed, the road ahead stretched into darkness. But for the first time in 15 years, Zara Mitchell, Angel Eye, Colonel Williams, whoever she chose to be, was looking forward to seeing where it led. Behind her, Preston Valley Shooting Club would never be the same. The old boys network that had ruled it for decades was crumbling. Federal investigators were combing through years of records, and somewhere, a young woman named Jessica was signing up for her first real training session. Change, Sarah reflected, often came at the speed of a bullet, too fast to see coming, impossible to stop once in motion, and sometimes, just sometimes, it hit exactly where it needed to. 10 targets, 10 seconds, 10 perfect shots. But the most important shot was the one that had brought her here in the first place. The decision to stop hiding, to honor the fallen by standing up to corruption, to prove that justice might be delayed but couldn't be denied forever. As the lights of the city faded in her mirrors and the open road beckoned ahead, Sarah allowed herself one moment of pure satisfaction. Then she focused on the future, on the students she would train, the testimonies she would give, the community she would help build, because in the end, the best revenge wasn't just living well, it was ensuring that the sacrifices of the past created a better future for those who came after. And that was a target worth aiming for. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in the state capitol was packed to capacity for the most anticipated trial in recent memory. Sarah Mitchell, now officially restored to her identity as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Williams, retired, sat in the witness gallery, her dress blues immaculate, her chest adorned with medals she hadn't worn in 15 years. Beside her sat Maria Rodriguez, Marcus's daughter, now a freshman at State University, thanks to the scholarship fund established with Sarah's competition winnings and the subsequent donations that had poured in after her story went national. The prosecution had built an airtight case against Victor Brennan and his network of conspirators. What had started as an investigation into defense contract irregularities had exploded into one of the largest corruption scandals in military procurement history. Brennan Industries had been selling intelligence to anyone willing to pay: insurgent groups, foreign governments, private military contractors. The evidence was damning: encrypted communications, offshore accounts, and most crucially, testimony from former employees who'd been waiting years for the chance to speak truth to power. Sarah's testimony had been the linchpin. Over 3 days, she'd methodically detailed the intelligence failures that had led to her unit's ambush, connecting dots that investigators had been struggling to link for years. She'd presented classified documents previously thought destroyed, that she'd secretly preserved against direct orders. Her photographic memory and sniper's attention to detail had captured conversations, dates, and financial transactions that corroborated everything the prosecution alleged. But it was her account of holding Marcus Rodriguez as he died that had silenced even Brennan's high-powered defense team. Private Rodriguez had 12 minutes, she'd testified, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. 2 minutes between the bullet that should have been stopped by properly maintained body armor and the moment his heart stopped. He spent those 2 minutes making me promise to take care of his family, to make sure his daughter went to college. He never asked why the intelligence was wrong. He never blamed anyone. He just trusted that someday, somehow, the truth would matter. The defense had tried to paint her as a bitter veteran seeking revenge, but the strategy backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, Sarah had calmly recited the names, ranks, and hometowns of every soldier killed due to compromised intelligence linked to Brennan's dealings, 47 names in total, each one delivered with the precision of a rifle shot. By the time she finished, several jury members were openly weeping. The Preston Valley Shooting Club had undergone its own transformation. Carl Worthington, with the backing of reform-minded members, had pushed through sweeping changes to the bylaws. The club's first female members had been admitted, including Jessica Chen, who, under Sarah's tutelage, had progressed from nervous beginner to confident marksman in record time. The old boys' network had crumbled, some members resigning in protest, others adapting to the new reality. The club's membership had actually increased, drawing veterans and law enforcement officers inspired by Sarah's story. Sarah had established the Angel Eye Training Academy in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. What started as informal lessons for Jessica had grown into a full-fledged training center, specializing in precision shooting and tactical skills for military, law enforcement, and carefully vetted civilians. Her instructors were all veterans, many from special operations backgrounds, each one committed to Sarah's philosophy of ethical training and responsible firearms handling. The firearms. Jake Martinez had become her lead instructor, bringing his ranger expertise to complement her sniper skills. Together, they developed a curriculum that went beyond marksmanship, incorporating ethics, de-escalation technique, and decision-making under stress. We're not creating killers, Sarah would tell each new class. We're creating guardians, people who understand that with great skill comes greater responsibility. The academy had attracted attention from the highest levels of military and law enforcement. The FBI had contracted them to retrain their sniper teams, impressed by Sarah's innovative techniques for long-range precision. The Secret Service had sent their counter-sniper units for advanced training. Even foreign allies had inquired about sending their special operations forces to learn from the legendary Angel Eye. But Sarah's proudest achievement was the Marcus Rodriguez Memorial Program, which provided free training to Gold Star families and veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. Every Saturday, the Academy opened its doors to those who'd sacrificed for their country, offering not just marksmanship training but a community of understanding and support. Many found that the discipline and focus required for precision shooting helped them manage PTSD symptoms, providing a constructive outlet for their military skills. Jessica Chen had become Sarah's star pupil and eventually her assistant instructor. The young woman who'd once been intimidated by the hostile environment at Preston Valley was now teaching basic marksmanship to new students with confidence and compassion. She'd also followed her uncle into federal law enforcement, using her skills to protect and serve rather than intimidate or dominate. On this day in the courthouse, as the prosecution rested its case against Victor Brennan, Sarah felt the circle finally closing. The defense would present their case, but everyone knew the outcome was foregone. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too much truth finally brought to light. Brennan would likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his co-conspirators facing their own trials. As court recessed for lunch, Maria Rodriguez approached Sarah in the hallway. The young woman was the image of her father, the same determined eyes, the same quiet strength. "Colonel Williams," she said, then caught herself. "Sorry, I mean Sarah. I wanted to thank you again, not just for the scholarship, but for everything, for keeping your promise to my dad." Sarah embraced the young woman, feeling Marcus's presence in that moment. "Your father saved my life more times than I can count," she said softly. "This was the least I could do. He'd be so proud of you." "Maria, pre-med at State, top of your class. You're going to save lives in your own way." They were interrupted by a commotion near the courthouse entrance. A group of veterans, many in dress uniforms, had gathered in silent support. They'd been coming every day of the trial, a quiet testament to the bonds forged in service. Sarah recognized several faces. soldiers whose lives had been saved by intelligence she'd provided, operations she'd overseen, shots she'd taken to protect American forces. Among them stood Master Sergeant Lisa Hawkins, who'd served as Sarah's spotter after Marcus was killed. They'd lost touch after Sarah's discharge, but Lisa had reached out after seeing news coverage of the Preston Valley competition. "Colonel," she said, snapping a salute that Sarah returned reflexively. "Figured you could use some backup." "Ma'am." Old habits and all. The afternoon session brought Brennan himself to the stand, a last-ditch attempt by his defense team to humanize him to the jury. He painted himself as a patriot who'd made difficult choices in complex situations, a businessman caught up in forces beyond his control. But under the prosecutor's withering cross-examination, his story crumbled like tissue paper. Confronted with evidence of specific operations compromised by his intelligence sales, he could only stammer excuses and deflections. The moment of truth came when the prosecutor displayed a photograph on the courtroom screen. Marcus Rodriguez, in uniform, smiling beside his wife and infant daughter at his deployment ceremony. "Mr. Brennan," the prosecutor said quietly, "can you look at this photo and tell Private Rodriguez's daughter why her father had to die for your profit margins?" Brennan's facade finally cracked completely. He broke down on the stand, not with genuine remorse, but with the self-pitying tears of a man who'd finally been caught. His rambling attempt at justification, market pressures, shareholder demands, the complexities of global business only damned him further in the eyes of the jury. By the time he left the stand, his fate was sealed. That evening, Sarah stood on the roof of the Angel Eye Training Academy. Watching the sun set over the city, the warehouse district had been transformed by their presence, other veteran-owned businesses moving in, creating a community of service and support. Below, night classes were in session, the muffled sounds of controlled gunfire punctuating the evening air. Tomorrow would bring the closing arguments, likely a verdict by week's end. But Sarah's war was already won, not through violence or revenge, but through patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to truth. She'd honored her promise to Marcus, protected future soldiers from betrayal, and built something positive from the ashes of tragedy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Great class tonight. 12 students qualified for advanced training. P.S. That journalist from 60 Minutes called again about the documentary." Sarah smiled, typing back, "Tell them we'll consider it after the trial. Focus on your students for now. Remember, front sight focus, steady trigger press, follow through, in shooting and in life." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. 15 years of hiding had ended with 10 perfect shots in 10 seconds. But the real victory was in everything that followed. Victor Brennan would face justice. His victims would find closure, and a new generation would learn that strength came not from domination but from service, discipline, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The angel of death had become an angel of justice, and her aim remained as true as ever: